And we're recording. Sweet. So obviously this is part 2 of exercise 1. Normally, especially if you look at like the past videos, you'll see that this part, if you will, is actually like on top of some of the previous exercise 1s because I do go through it really fast, right? That being said, we can always go back to it and see what we missed and everything like that. But last time we pretty much stopped at this make 2D. So if you still need to make 2D of your certain steps, then of course refer to part 1, right? But as you guys may know, printing something like this actually looks pretty bad. It's just one line weight, and if we've learned anything in Graphics 1 or Graphics 2 or just any architecture class, is that we know that line weight is key, right? And to be fair, this program is pretty sweet because I can't even mess up, right? I can always change, and to be fair, I find it to be the most organized OCD system, and it just really matches my personality. But last time we talked about how we're actually making a step-by-step diagram, right? So for instance, we maybe even included that we didn't even need the box, right, as a step. So we only need 3 steps. So 1, maybe 2, and arguably 3. So what's kind of nice about this is we can kind of set some things up. We can kind of get it on the page more or less kind of what we want. If you've taken a Graphics 1 class, you know that you've had to make a title block, right? So for instance, I can offset and type in an inch, or sorry, not an inch because we're at a different scale. Offset. I can change the distance. I can always click on that command bar, right? I'm going to go ahead and start making a title block and everything, right? So again, what's really nice is I can draw here, just like I would actually a drafting table. So for some of us who have taken Graphics 1, the methodology hasn't changed. What has changed is now I have to type in something and I no longer have a lead pencil, right? That's really all that's changed. So for some of us, hopefully you're picking it up pretty intuitively and realizing, oh shit, this is just like Graphics 1, but with some perfection. And again, if you were in Escamillas, it is a lot like Graphics 1 because you had me a little bit as well teaching the computer. However, what I would suggest is definitely get set up here first. Make sure you get all the flat lines down, you get everything exactly the way you want it. And what I mean by that, I won't fully do today, but it's already starting to be organized, right? We have one layer in red versus another layer in orange. We have some of the minor or secondary pieces, and arguably we even have like tertiary pieces, right? Levels that we want to establish in line weight. However, in the next program, Adobe Illustrator, which we'll be going over today, I don't want to sit there and click on stuff. Why? Because it is awful, right? And I'll actually show you, and man, I can't tell you how many hours I wasted as a student selecting things that I'll never get back, ever, right? You know, so hopefully, if anything, this actually starts to save us a lot of time in our architecture classes. As you guys know, we're always pressed for time. So in our case, rule 1, I would say get everything kind of situated here, laid out here in Rhino first before I take it into Illustrator. That means I could add text. To be fair, I could add text in Rhino or Illustrator. To be fair, that's pretty simple in both cases. But like for instance, selecting lines like this in Illustrator can be haphazard, right? Trying to scale them, again, can be not as easy as Rhino and what we're learning. However, maybe once I've got the composition, I've got step 1, step 2, step 3, and final. Let's say that was done. Now again, you don't have to practice what I'm doing here. You can mix it and match it in your own way. Now I would say keep the paper 11 by 17 landscape, right? Just how I've positioned it here. But other than that, I really want to see what you guys are doing, how you're thinking, how you're coming up with your Lego diagram to show off how this object was made. Not necessarily how pretty or how cool it looks, right? However, we can do a lot here, right? So for instance, I'm going to set up some line weight and call this one, say, I don't know, LW1, right? And give it a certain line weight. Maybe I give it, I don't know, a certain color because I don't even have to keep that color, by the way. So I don't know, maybe I'm going to do this like purple, magenta, violet line weight series, if you will. So we'll call that line weight 1. I'll make a new one, line weight 2. And you can kind of see where this is going, right? I can make as many line weights as I want. Well, to be fair, I think you can only make up to 256 layers, but line weights 3, right? And let's say one of them is going to be really thick. So I don't know. We'll use a dark green for that one. And again, it's not so much the color that's important, because again, it gets changed. So, and violet, sure. Now what's important here is that, again, selecting them here in Rhino first, that way when I go to Illustrator, I just change them layers and I'm done, right? I'm not sitting there selecting, or God forbid, trying to draw a straight line in Illustrator. What draws straight lines great? Rhino. What draws lines very well curved? Illustrator, right? It's definitely more of a hand sketchy thing. Whereas in architecture, we're always needing pretty straight angles and arguably good isometric curves as well. So from here, one thing I'll notice is that when I made 2D, stuff came in grouped. So, well, you can't really change anything, or if I just want to select this line, it's kind of hard to select that. So in my case, I'm going to select everything and ungroup it. Right. I could even make a copy of that just in case I wanted to keep the grouped version, if you will, or not. But in our case, what's nice now is I can change the line weight. So for instance, I can hold Shift and add to my selection. Now, arguably, even that's way easier to do in Illustrator, right? Because as soon as I select something in Illustrator, it stops showing actually what's selected, and I'll show you what I mean by that. So for instance, right here, I'm just getting the outline because I do want the outline to be potentially a little bit thicker. So I need to change the layer. So for instance, let's say that was good. That's looking pretty sweet. I'm going to right click on, say, layer 1 and change object layer. You'll immediately notice it turns to purple, right? That's kind of a dead giveaway. Now, if it doesn't change to purple, it could be two reasons, right? So if you go to the properties, this little color circle, you'll notice that it has an arrangement of things about the object. So for instance, the name of the layer or the name of the object, you can even name these like cool line. So don't get me wrong, I don't always need to name my parts, but it is kind of nice, especially if I'm working on a skyscraper and I need to know exactly room 613 on the west wing, and I have it on a layer, right? So don't get me wrong, eventually this really gets into the sauce, and eventually you're working on a project for like 4 years. You got time, right? Whereas in school, you're working on a project for like 4 to 6 weeks. So don't get me wrong, there's kind of a difference in time scale. But that being said, we organize everything in architecture, to say the very least. However, let's say I wanted that to be an even lighter line weight, or I just wanted to change it. And again, I can't tell you how much easier it is selecting something just holding Shift in Rhino. Whereas doing that in Illustrator is like pulling teeth, and you will be there kind of confused on what you selected. And I'll definitely make that keenly necessary if I haven't already. But this being the case, again, I can change the line weight, right click, and change object layer. That's a game changer, right? And you can kind of see those, well, maybe not so much on the projector, but it looks pretty good on the screen. But again, for the sake of the tutorial, and I said I wouldn't go so fast or I wouldn't go so slow on this one, I do want to show enough difference. So like for instance, these inner lines, maybe I show those a little bit lighter, right? Such as these isometric ones, or maybe altogether I get rid of them. Maybe I don't even need those. See what I'm saying? And let me tell you, that's way easier in Rhino too. So again, maybe I clean it up a little bit before I put it into Illustrator, and that's key. Clean it up before you go into Illustrator. So it's kind of like you really want to do a majority of the work in Rhino. But it starts to clean up the object, and I can still add some objects as well. So for instance, maybe I needed another line in there, or I accidentally got rid of one, or I just want to trim it up. TRIM, and trim it up. So don't get me wrong, we can kind of fake it till we make it. And this is what I was mentioning last time in part 1, that if I can't model it, I just draw it. If I can't draw it, sometimes I have to model it. But most of the time we can kind of draw what we see, especially if you've taken Freehand 1, Freehand 2, Graphics 1, or Graphics 2, right? We know how to draw, and you do, even if you don't actually feel like it. But in our case, what I'm trying to say is make sure you do the drawing here, fix it here in Rhino first, because it's way easier. Now, let's pretend that we were completely done. I labeled everything, I got all the line weights settled, and maybe let's actually practice what I preach a little bit. Now, I'm just going to kind of just get some random lines in here so that we have something to change in Illustrator. But for the most part, you should actually refer to your rules, right, of the line weights, not so much just me arbitrarily clicking on lines. So let's say that was it, and I'm going to change this to line weight 3. So again, right click, change object layer, and again, you'll see those immediately change to something you can see it on the projector actually pretty well. Sweet. Doesn't show up on the screen very well. Anyway, so again, let's say we were done. I'm going to select everything and put it into Illustrator. Well, how? Well, there's a couple of ways, right? And to be fair, some ways work better than others, and some don't work at all for the version that you're using, right? However, one rule that could be said, remember how I was explaining this is our origin point on our C plane, and it stands for a 0, 0 point. You can almost think of it as the center of the universe, right? Because everything else is just honestly like a coordinate system. Have any of you guys taken pre-cal? And you have your quadrant 1, quadrant 2, quadrant 3, quadrant 4. Hey, that's it, right? And to be fair, in Illustrator, everything is in quadrant 1. So if I accidentally have this way over here, guess what's not going to show up in Illustrator? This drawing, right? Because it's way far from the center of the universe, right? So if I do want it to get shown up, I might have to actually move some stuff out of place, take what I actually do want to export, and make sure that it's within at least that first origin. Does that make sense, guys? For the most part, I think a lot of us accidentally kind of forget that step, myself included, when I'm taking stuff into Illustrator. So I'll take all of it, and again, quoting quote, imagine I'm finished, right? This is not finished. So, I mean, gosh, I forgot, we can add a little bit more. Remember I showed you guys hatching? We could even do some hatching. I can select everything, hatch, and get some shade and shadow on this bad boy as well. So I usually like a boundary mode, that way I can kind of select what I want. Maybe I get that one. And maybe that one's, I don't know, solid, so that I can maybe show it like in a dark shadow. But if I wanted to get graphical as well, I could do the same thing, enter. And I would say this is, again, a lot easier to draw in Rhino than it is, like for instance, check this out, trying to hatch this top piece and get the little sort of pieces of those arrows inside. So again, I know this is a little bit more advanced, but just in case you're kind of running into the same thing, I'm in that boundary mode of hatch, and when I click on it, you'll see that it literally goes around that. Guess what Illustrator doesn't do? That. And that saves you time, and time is money, and I like money. I think we all want to have a little bit more, right, and change our lifestyles. However, once you're finished, you'll hit enter, and you'll notice absolutely nothing actually closed, and that's okay too. What it means is that this is actually not a closed situation, right? So one thing that you might have to do is actually take the pieces that are in question, and only those pieces, if you're trying to hatch something. In my case, hatch. And again, see if we can get that piece. Nope, doesn't want to do it. Well, I stand corrected. And that's okay. I'll show you at least how to do that in Illustrator if you particularly want to. However, I'll show you why it sometimes works and of course sometimes doesn't work. Don't get me wrong, there's not a right or wrong way to computers, but there is a faster way and a slower way, to say the least. And let me tell you, as a student, I definitely, unfortunately, got some really bad habits with the slow way. And I'd really hate for you to do it that way. So one of the things I never did was change the layers. I always exported it as one layer. Do not do this. If you notice it only comes in one layer, that's wrong. Try it again, right? So in our case, again, let's imagine I was finished, got some poché, I got some hatches going, I got, again, a lot going on. So I'll go to File, Export Selected. Right, not just export, because that'll get everything. I just need the part that I've selected, so export selected. And to be fair, there are two pretty tried and true methods. In my case, I'm just going to put it on the desktop as test lines. In your case, I would label it exercise 1. Go figure. I would even put it in my computer architecture graphics folder in exercises. That way I can make sure that I'd never lose it. I'd even save it in 2 spots because, unfortunately, computers get stolen. How many of you guys have an iCloud or Google Drive? Get one if you don't, right? I can't tell you how much we worked for 4 years on our architectural project. Sir, I can't make a portfolio because my computer was stolen. Looks like you got to take architecture again. That's a lot of money. That's a lot of time. I don't think anybody wants to do that. In fact, I've even known some students where they got their stuff jacked and stolen. They just gave up. That's pretty sad. And again, I would hate for it to happen to anybody. So always save your stuff in two places if you don't already have some sort of iCloud or Google Drive, right? Just word of to the wise, right? It is pretty rare that you get your stuff stolen these days because they're all GPS now, but still, it does happen. So I'll save it to the desktop, and we'll call it just, some test lines. Now, what's keyly important here is it can be saved as two different things, arguably three different things. You'll notice in the newer version, it literally has an Adobe Illustrator file. That's sweet. If you have the latest version of Illustrator, it works. If you don't have the latest version of Illustrator, sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. Honestly, we're scientists here. We're not afraid to make mistakes. Save it as both and see which works better, right, to say the very least. Now, in my case, I know my computer pretty well, and I'm going to save it as a DWG. Yes, that's an AutoCAD drawing file. They're vector programs. They work in the vector coding language. So we'll use a DWG and or Illustrator, right? We'll export it. And in my case, it'll say 2007 lines. Honestly, I just pick CAM Imperial, which is the imperial or metric system. 2007 lines also works too, but again, my computer seems to like CAM, which stands for Computer Aided Modeling Imperial. I'll hit export, and I just want to show you what the Illustrator file does as well. So let's go ahead and save it as an Illustrator file also. Not that you have to do both, right, for the sake of tutorial, but just to kind of show you what does what. And we'll call that one test lines too. Now, when you're saving in an Illustrator file, it'll say, hey, what scale do you want it? Honestly, this is a scaleless project, right? We're not tackling scale in exercise 1, so don't worry about it yet, right? So preserve model scale? Hell no, just give me a snapshot of the current view. Otherwise, if I preserve the model scale, remember how large this is, right? It's like feet by feet. We're in the units of feet. Is it even gonna fit on a 24 by 36 piece of paper? You're gonna end up with nothing there and be like, where is it? Well, it's like ginormous, and it's actually gonna come in at true scale. So, export. In my case, I just preserve the model, shouldn't be a big deal. I'll go ahead and minimize those and go ahead and open up Illustrator. For the most part, it looks just about like this, and I'm going to treat this as if this is the first time you're looking at Illustrator. Now remember what I said, we want to spend the least amount of time in Illustrator, so that is at least what we plan to do. Now don't get me wrong, once we get further and further into the exercises, I'm going to do more advanced stuff in Rhino and do more advanced stuff in Illustrator. However, I want to give us a nice base standard. So from here, we'll just hit open. Another way that you could do it is select File New, right, and make 11 by 17, right? So you could do it that way too. But just to show you how these both open, we'll go up to Desktop, and you'll see one looks like an Illustrator file. It is called an AI file. You'll notice that when you open it, it kind of just opens a file, kind of in a random spot. And to be fair, it's not really to any scale yet, right? You'll notice that the paper itself is just kind of random, but all of our lines, and more importantly, all of our layers are there. Right, all the different colors that were established in Rhino are there. That's a good sign, because if they're all one color, we probably did it wrong. So let's make sure we didn't do it wrong also on the DWG. I'll go to File, Open, and again, I'm just kind of doing this both just in case whichever one works best for your computer. To be fair, updates don't always hit or drop these lab computers instantly, so again, DWG, CAM Imperial is kind of the way to go, and if I wrote down anything about exporting today, it would be DWG and CAM Imperial. Anyway, however, you'll see that one didn't even want to open, so DWG just like gave up. Look at that. Illustrator could not open this file. It needs to be repaired. So I saved it wrong, or it just got corrupted. It happens, right? To be fair, I kind of want to see what it is, but for the sake of tutorial, let's move on because, it's already getting 30 minutes. Anyway, Illustrator is actually really easy, and I love this program, especially now the way that I use it. But just to explain it a little bit, one of the first tools that you want to get familiar with is just like Photoshop. And just like really anything in the Adobe suite is this right button, right, at the very top right. If you click on that, it's actually more like a workstation maker, right? So I think by default, it's actually on just Essentials. And you'll notice there's not a lot of tools. I think that's really unuseful. So again, make sure that you're in Essentials Classic, because To be fair, that's all the tool choices that I'm using. To be fair, we don't use all of them, but it is kind of nice to be able to see it, especially since there isn't a command bar. The next thing we want to get familiar with is our properties and our layers. So usually layers looks like little stacked pieces of paper, and there's the line weights, and where'd my layers go? Where's my layers? That's okay. If your layers are gone, usually it's in a tab or something. Sometimes you can actually like kind of put it in there, so just it looks like two stacked pieces of squares. But what's really nice here is, well, we can turn everything off and turn everything back on at a click of a button. And I kind of wish Rhino would do that as well. But let's get this actually to the right size, at least in terms of that 11 by 17, right? Because we do have our box that represents the ratio of 11 by 17s. Oh, let's make that match whatever this might be and double check it. So in Illustrator, you'll notice we have a lot of the similar commands as, say, Photoshop, right? And of course you have the properties bar at the very top. I can't tell you enough, that's a wonderful tool. But in our case, we'll go to File, Document Setup, Edit Artboard, which is what that white piece is. It basically correlates to a piece of paper. And when we go into artboard mode, it basically goes, hey, how big do you want it? And by default, it is the only artboard there, and I could technically add another one as well. Right? I don't need to add another piece of paper, but what's kind of nice about that is if I was making a PDF document and I needed like several pages, just add them, right? And what's even better is it says artboard number 2. It's going to be page 2 of my PDF. Again, not actually what I need, but in my case, I need to verify that this one's 11 by 17. So I'll click on it. I'll go to the top, width 17, height 11. Voila, I just lucked out, I guess. Now, you may not luck out in your case, or you may have several artboards. You might want to delete one, and that's definitely where you delete it. Just to read that again, File, Document Setup, and of course, Edit Artboards. From there, I like to just isolate these, but in my case, I want to get the right size. So I need to line up this rectangle with that rectangle. So line up one of the corners first, right? In our case, you'll kind of see the program tries to kind of help you out. In my case, I'll zoom in using Command +. And you'll kind of see those purple arrow or purple lines start to come up, indicating that it's going, hey, did you mean right here perfectly at this edge? Why, yes, I did mean that. And in our case, we do need to make it the actual size. So select everything. I'll hold Shift, that way it stays proportional. If I don't hold Shift, that's never going to be correct, and it's going to manipulate the drawing, right? I definitely don't want that. I don't want stretchy drawings. So I hold Shift, and it should line up perfectly, right? In our case, wonderfully does. Now, I don't really actually need the bounding box, so I'll go ahead and get rid of that. And voila, we're done, right? That looks pretty bad, right? If we were to print that out, nobody could absolutely understand what we're doing. So here's the trick. We'll do one layer at a time. So in my case, massing. Let's select all the massing by, it is kind of weird, there's no button there, but if you click on this empty space on each layer, it selects everything in that layer. You'll notice off to the side we have basically the fill and the line layer itself. Right now, usually by default, it stays within the color that it was. If I double click on that and switch to a grayscale, right, it even uploads in real time, right, changing that. And as you can see, that's a very light line weight. In fact, the lightest line weight that the printer can print is 0.125. So in my case, I'll go back to my layers. I'll select everything in that layer and change the stroke. Right now it's 0.0003, which is insane. So in my case, I'm going to switch it to the lightest line weight of 0.125. Enter. And that's not correct. It accidentally chose 125 points. That's okay. I can't really mess up. So 0.125, enter. And that's a little bit better, right? At least in terms of line weight. Maybe it's like a construction line, if you will. And it kind of looks green, honestly, on the projector. However, don't get me wrong, I could select something, but it doesn't select too well. And this is exactly what I meant by don't select things in Illustrator. In fact, if I just want that line, and that line, and that line, pretty soon I have no idea what I selected. See what I'm saying? And there's a huge problem selecting something in Illustrator. Will they ever fix it? Well, time will tell, right, to say the very least. But let's keep going. Because I really don't have to move anything, I don't have to draw anything. All I got to do is lock some layers and keep going. Next layer, select, sweet. Definitely don't want orange. I want a kind of more of a dark grayscale. And I'm going to go with something more very thick, so like 0.56 maybe, enter. Sweet. Next layer, lock it. Ooh, select everything, sweet. Definitely don't want green. Let's go with something dark on that one and kind of thick to kind of, you know, indicate that it's important. Maybe we'll go with like a 1.2, nice. How about the next one, lock, go. Oh, sweet, we got to take care of that guy. So we'll select everything, obviously don't want red. And maybe we choose a lighter line weight, maybe dark, I like it. Sweet, maybe we fill it in. Oh, maybe not, it's not exactly filled, right? There's kind of a line in there. So what I could have done was actually hatch it, right? However, I can't hatch in this program, unfortunately. But what I can do is redraw something. So don't get me wrong, I said don't draw something, but just in case you have to, right? You can basically make something. Right, so in my case, if I can remember, not make clipping mask, but make compound path is another good one. I think the easiest way though is probably object and to live paint it. So live paint, we're gonna make it and basically click inside of it. So we'll get like a little bucket or live paint tool. Now by default, you might have to right click on some of these and actually find the live bucket and click inside. You'll notice it didn't really do anything because I didn't select a color, but we can select stuff too. You could even select potentially a gradient so that it actually kind of looks like it's actually, you see what I mean? Like kind of like it's going through those colors. You can also change the line as well. I believe by changing the gradient. So if we take that piece, you can change the angle of it, things like that. And again, softer the better. Oversaturating something can go a long way. But keep in mind, that only worked because I had a closed object, right? That doesn't work on an open object. And to be fair, how would I solve that? Just hatch it in Rhino first. Simple, right? So not a big deal, but definitely starts to really bring back some character and starts to actually read like a three-dimensional object. Sweet. Let's go back to those layers. Again, we'll lock that one, select the next one. Wonderful. I'll click on that invisible box. That's probably the hardest for a lot of students. They're like, what's that invisible box you're talking about? Yeah, it's the invisible box. You'll notice that right now I have selected different things. Basically, it says a question mark because I've selected multiple items and it basically goes, hey, you actually have multiple colors in here. I can't just show you one, so I'm going to show question mark. Computers in 2026. Anyway, in my case, I'm going to double click on those and basically just change them manually. Right, so maybe like a soft dark weight. And you'll notice I don't use a true black. Do you guys notice that? It's almost too rich, and in fact, once it gets onto the printer, it often is way too black, right? I can't tell you how many times in Graphics 1 or Graphics 2, you're actually trying to mimic your graphic scales, your line weights. You're trying to mimic that sort of gray, graphite-y, shiny look that goes on the paper, and that's not the way to do it. What's the way to do it is to realize that everything that we drew was actually in a very soft grayscale, right? Even though it's the darkest element out there and it reads as black, it is not a true black, right? Even if you got a Sharpie pen and you really looked at it, it's actually a dark, 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 dark purple. It's not even black. There is no such thing as black ink. In fact, if you get the black ink and the toner in there and you spread it out really thin, guess what color it is? Dark, 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 dark purple. Kind of a myth that there's black ink, right? Anyway, but at least some of the tried and true reasons I say that is actually you're trying to make it to where Escamilla walks by these prints and goes, wow, those are great drafts. Wait a minute, those aren't drafts. But again, that's what we're trying to implicate is actually the strong contrast and the difference between those varying line weights, and the difference between them is actually what makes a strong contrast. In our case, that's looking pretty good though. And let's say I wanted to thicken up the lines, I don't know, 0.9, enter, and we can go for something like that. You'll notice that mine kind of stayed in purple. And if that be the case, right, I mean, not a big deal. Another way that we can select stuff in Illustrator is select what we actually want. And you'll notice actually it changed the inside, but didn't change the outside, and that's okay. I'll select everything, and again, double click on that layer, and maybe go with something really dark or really light. Oh, that actually kind of works pretty well. Sweet. Not too shabby. But notice I haven't really had to move anything around. I haven't really had to draw anything except for that shading. Let's go to our next layer. Again, lock. Let's get a little bit lighter in there. I forgot I had most of those in there. So again, we don't want pink lines, that's for sure. Maybe go with something a little bit lighter. Or actually, we can go with darker, but thinner, right? And we'll go with like a 0.2. So just because you have a light line weight doesn't necessarily mean it has to be a lighter color. So again, we could really mix and match between the different available line weights that we have. In fact, arguably one of the first assignments that another professor does is just make 9 lines, right? And that's his whole assignment. You have 3 layers that are your darkest element, but they're 3 different sizes. You have your medium tones, but they're 3 different sizes. And you have your light tones, and they're 3 different sizes. That way you can really start to indicate, wait a minute, the mid-tone of the darkest is kind of like the lightest of the mid-tone. Again, if that absolutely didn't make sense, that's why I don't make an assignment. Because I'm more one that kind of learns as I go, right? I learn by my mistakes. I learn what starts to look good and the way that I like to look at it, not just answering and making some robots. But as you can see, right away, we're starting to get kind of this level of clarity. Do you guys start to see it? Even without the use of color, I can tell different objects compared to the main object. And that's definitely what we're going for. Arguably, if I didn't talk so much, I'd be done already. But let's keep going. And last but not least, that last green layer. And let's maybe go with something slightly dark, but of course slightly lighter. Maybe a 0.33. Not too shabby. I can't tell you how much I wish I had that in Graphics 1, right? To just be able to change it. However, I didn't realize how much I needed to change something, of course, until this program. Now, usually the question that most students have is, well, what if I notice a mistake that I didn't do in Rhino that I really kind of need to get back? Well, there's a couple things. If it's just a line or the moving of something, I mean, don't get me wrong, you could probably break my rules a little bit. You could probably try to select something. But don't get me wrong, it's not exactly easy. I could hold shift and I can relatively kind of move stuff in certain directions. Don't get me wrong, it's not like impossible, but it's easy to make a mistake, right, to say the very least. And selecting something without accidentally selecting everything else, oops, I accidentally have this line, and it still shows me everything. And I gotta tell you, that is the most frustrating thing when you're trying to move stuff. What I would suggest is keep it the way it is, right? Because you haven't moved or drawn anything. You could always add something. So for instance, a polyline. And let's say I wanted to make the border of my final object a lot darker or something. So for instance, I'll draw a polyline, which is really just a continuous line. I'll make sure that I'm in a certain layer that's at least different. So I don't know, we'll go with the remove layer. And in my case, I'll just trace my object because it's way easier here. Look how much easier it is here. I'm just like clicking, it's auto snapping. Guess what Illustrator doesn't have? Auto snap. Now over the day it does, that'll be a game changer. So in my case, I'll just take the pieces that I want to add, right? So I also want to make sure that I take the rectangle, because remember, that's what we actually used to match it up. So in my case, I'll take these 2 pieces, file, export selected. I could do it all over again. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm just changing layers. It didn't take that long, right? So, however, maybe I'm very pressed for time. I'm about to print Gopher Studio, those kinds of things. So I'll call this one fix, because again, it's not very necessary. I'll eventually delete it. And we'll save it as that AI file since it worked. In my case, I'll snapshot the current view, not a big deal. Again, when we actually have to go for scale, it'll be a little bit different. Here, I basically just want to open that file again. So the fix, make sure that I get that fix, and you can kind of see it in there. Make sure I take the whole thing, copy. Now this is where you can do Command C and Command V. And again, we'll do the exact same thing. So I can lock all these real quick. That way I don't accidentally mess up what I already have. And basically size that back. So again, lining up the corner. And like I said, lining up stuff in this program is just like pulling teeth. You kind of have to wait for these little purple lines to show up. It's very annoying. Oh, there's a purple line. Nailed it. And again, size it by holding Shift And bringing it right in. Look at that bad boy. Almost lines up. Almost lines up. It's okay. Just need a few little hairs to the left. And arguably maybe a little line to the right. Sweet. So we'll take that piece. Maybe we'll make that thick border that we're going for.
What did you do that for again?
I just, wanted to quote unquote fix it, right? I needed to add something that I forgot last time, right? So I was just showing how you could potentially add it back.
Okay.
Right? That way you don't necessarily have to start over every time that you get into Illustrator, every time that you want to change line weights. But for the most part, guys, for assignment 1, this is all I'm asking for. Now, don't get me wrong, the last thing I need to do is, of course, put my name on the bottom left. So let's go ahead and do that. I'll go to my text box. I'll basically make some Pig Latin. That's pretty sweet. And we'll go with Professor Verrett, exercise 1. Don't necessarily need a title block, guys, but we do need to label things, right, to say the very least. That's looking kind of small if you ask me. And to be fair, I think most of us know how to change fonts and sizes and things like that. So again, I'm not trying to like beat a dead horse or anything. I know most of us probably know how to do some of that stuff, so get familiar with it. And again, maybe you didn't select the right layer. You can always select stuff if it's unlocked, and you can still change it too, right? So it's not like it's like detrimentally like, oh man, I gotta go back just to change the layer. No, you should be more proactive in changing your layers. But to be fair, technically yes, you can select things and change them, but be very careful, right, to say the least. However, last but not least, I do need to actually maybe label these, right? If I was going for broke, press for time, I'm gonna go with step 1. Actually, instead of step 1, I'm gonna call it what I'm doing, wire cut. Oh, that's a good step. And it's actually informative, and it actually tells somebody what I'm doing. Can't just hit copy. I do that all the time. I can't tell you how much. I can drag something and hold Option, and it'll make a copy. You can also hold Alt on Window, and it'll make a copy, right? And again, a game changer, to say the very least. Now, if you don't select the right box, right, and maybe this one's called, I don't know, Final. Or fin, to indicate the end, right? Maybe I call this one Subtraction. And maybe I call this one Cone Removal. So again, I'm pretty sure as long as somebody understood English, they'd know exactly what I just did, wouldn't they? Man, I didn't really have to break it down. I didn't have to make a video for them and move around everywhere. I simply use this document for its line weight and its ability, right? Now, don't get me wrong, we're gonna get more into the sauce in terms of how to use Illustrator, but in terms of exercise 1, we're just trying to get some line weight. And arguably, we can start messing with some poche and some gradients and things like that as well. So, again, sorry I made this one a little bit longer again, but of course it's just part 2 of exercise 1. So just to recap before we get some questions in, if we have any. We basically, reminder, we finish the drawing here first, right? We compose the drawing here first. You don't necessarily have to add text, but if you add a text box here in Illustrator, it's a text box. Kind of nice, right? So again, step 1, make sure you finish drawing in Rhino first. Step 2, export selected as a DWG or an AI file, Adobe Illustrator, not artificial intelligence. From there, again, kind of the basic step is make sure you're in an Essentials Classic, that way you have all your tools, and begin to change your line weights with that invisible box. Can't say that enough. It's definitely kind of a weird one, because I say click on an invisible box and it's like saying, hey, click on that invisible thing that doesn't exist. So it does take some practice. However, that's really just about it for today. And honestly, we have still 30 to 40 minutes if you guys want to work in class. But before I end the video, was there any kind of questions about Illustrator, the export process? Not necessarily modeling questions, right? I'll do that personally. Anything about Illustrator? Want me to click on again? Fair enough?
So to export it from Rhino, you export it as a DWG.
Correct.
And it'll just pop up the
Correct.
Okay.
You can also try the AI file, because every computer is kind of a little bit different. What it happens to deal with, not to get technical, is the differences between the Illustrator versions. Like I have the latest version, so you'll notice that the AI worked. However, the school computer may not have the latest Illustrator version. You might have to try DWG or the AI file. Great question.
Okay.
Any others, guys? Welcome to some of us who made it a little bit later. Got your messages. Thank you. However, no more questions? We'll leave it there for today.